Really, I'm engaged with this season of the NBA. Even though people are like, Golden State's going to win out, I think that there's more drama in the summer than it was in the finals. And, I think this drama, at least during the regular season, keeps people engaged during these dog days of the NBA before we get to the NBA All-Star break in February.
Well, and if you look at, and we'll stick with the East here, where obviously the Raptors, depending on how you want to grade that season, the slight philosophical change, what they're doing maybe offensively, but everyone's going to talk about Cleveland first. They're going to talk about LeBron. Well, I don't know if you can really it's if LeBron went to any other team, doesn't he probably take the Middle East to how far does he go? Does he go to a finals or at least win a conference or go to the conference finals? He probably does, because I still think he's probably, in terms of an athletic specimen at the highest level of a sport. I know people are still going to talk about Michael Jordan. I certainly get that argument, but I really haven't seen a whole bunch of anything like I've seen with LeBron James. I'm a fan. I'm a huge fan.
There's not a comparison, despite people's mild to moderately, anally irritated feelings about LeBron surpassing Michael Jordan somehow. I think that when you see a guy in his 15th season of doing this and has gone to the final 7 years in a row, and been to the Olympics a couple times in that span, that's a lot of basketball in your body. And at 33, it doesn't sound like an old guy, but he's probably at 38 body-wise. But because of the way he takes care of his body, and the mental part of it is really a big deal and a really big part of it. You've never seen anything like this, and people try to deny it as much as they want to. The cognitive dissonance that goes on with this thing is amazing to me. Like, sometimes you have to appreciate greatness. And you've seen it in your lifetime. You've seen Michael Jordan, and some of the people who don't, who cape for Michael Jordan, are kids who watch YouTube. They have YouTube nostalgia, as I call it, and they love sneakers. Yep. Because if Michael Jordan's sneakers sucked, you wouldn't be talking about him. Nobody talks about Magic sneakers, and I think that Magic Johnson, because I don't rate players who are still playing as the greatest, or like they could be eventually when he's done, but I'm not going to say that right now until his chapters are written. But Magic Johnson is the greatest player who ever lived to me, because he beat and lost to the greatest teams in the history of the NBA during his era. And I'm not talking about in 91 when he lost to the Bulls. I'm talking about in the 80s, where, there were teams that dominated. The Pistons, the Celtics, and the Lakers dominated that decade. And you saw who the top players were. And how many times did Michael Jordan even make the Eastern Conference Finals in the 80s? Once? That's how good the 80s were. And Magic, they say, well, they had a super team. Well, they were playing against super teams in the Pistons and the Celtics.
Well,
so,
and a lot of people will say, for instance, that in the Eastern Conference, if you're talking about what LeBron is doing and just the domination of the Cavs, they'll say, well, but look at the competition. Basketball is not as good.
That's a lie. Basketball is better because athletically, there are more athletes, there are more players who can play the game at a very high level. And again, the level of competition wasn't watered down by expansion during this time when Michael Jordan was winning. That's a whole nother conversation. I could have a whole show on that. And it's not
I think one day
dismiss.
You're going to have a whole show on that.
Well, I'm not going to dismiss the accomplishments of Michael Jordan. He won when he could win. And I don't knock that. But these two things can be true in the same space. When Michael Jordan won all these titles, but it was the weakest period in NBA history because of expansion. This is a better era of basketball. When Michael Jordan played on a 30-win team and made the playoffs, you don't tell me that's a better time. It was 1986, and they made the playoffs with 30 wins. But I'm not here to bash Michael Jordan. I'm looking at what LeBron James has done. You said, here's a guy who you think is going to be – they're going to make the Eastern Conference Finals again. You don't know. There's a lot of – when people start to wring their hands in January about a team – as they do every January about the Cleveland Cavaliers, and then somehow they make it to the LeBron Raymond James Invitational, the Eastern Conference Finals is what we call it now. Then that talk about January is gone. But in all of that, and to go back to what you were talking about with the Raptors, they have the best record they've ever had at this point. They're 30-13. This is the better team, and it's not just a slight offensive change.
You think it's more than that?
It is a drastic change of culture in the way they went about it. Now, I wrote an article at Press Basketball called it's called My Daddy Tools. It was about Vince Carter coming back and retiring here in the whole nine, getting him on the cheap, and bringing in a guy like C.J. Miles. And this is before this was like in May of last year. So it was before free agency. It was before everything else. And to see how I thought Jerry Stackhouse was going to get a chance to coach his team, like everything like that.
Yep.
The lineup looked a lot like what I wrote in my article, and they're going to change their philosophy to play the game in a different way. Now they're young guys who they've developed great with the 905. I think they have, outside of maybe Golden State, the best development program in the G League right now. And you see the fruits of that labor coming off in Fred VanVleet. You see it in Jakob Poeltl. You see it in Pascal Siakam. You see it in DeLon Wright. They're even bringing up guys, Lorenzo Brown. Like, they have young guys of that bench to make them one of the top benches in the NBA. And that second unit is going to be key in the playoffs, because if they can play the way they're playing right now.
Exactly, talking about that today. Absolutely.
They're going to be a problem. The Raptors are not a joke, and I think that, there's always this thing about, America doesn't pay attention. Why do you care? Win games, you'll get paid attention to, and you win games when they count. I'm not saying the regular season doesn't count, but when you get to the playoffs, you can't get swept, you can't get knocked out, and I think that, the year that they went to the Eastern Conference Finals was a little bit of fool's gold. Not disrespect, just it kind of hyped expectations of this team that shouldn't have been there because they were still in the growth period. If it happens this year and they lose, you have a legitimate reason to believe that they either have to look at changing the program or changing who's at the top of the program or doing something different. But this is a year that I think that the Raptors can make real noise in the playoffs and become a legitimate contender to anyone in the East.
Do they tinker with that lineup at all? I know you talk about a lot of these younger players. Do they package these younger players to bring in something before the trade deadline?
No, I think you trust your program. I mean, the funny part is Dwayne Casey has the best record of any coach who ever coached the Raptors.
Yep.
Every year they get better, and somehow someone wants to say, yeah, they should bring somebody else in. Well, he's done a great job in creating a culture here with Masai Ujiri, because in Masai you must trust, obviously. But, I think that they are who they are. They tried that last year and it didn't work out when they brought in Anthony Leon Tucker. You better know him as PJ.
Yep.
And just bringing in guys that were supposed to be LeBron stoppers, and instead of concentrating on what you do well, you're worried about who you're going to play. As a unit, as a team, you have to concentrate on what you do well and just do your job and give yourself the best chance to win. If you're so concerned about the other team that you hadn't even played yet, that's why you're bringing in guys.
Right.
You hadn't even played them. And that happened in the NFL playoffs. You saw that last weekend in Pittsburgh. I'm just saying.
I think that's called foreshadowing.
Yeah.
Yes.
I think that's what it is.